All right, let's jump right into it today. We're doing a deep dive focused on some fundamental terms in metabolic conditioning.
And the source we're pulling from is interesting. It's an excerpt from a glossary
Yeah.
by Pookie and Greg Glassman, linked with CrossFit.
Exactly. And let me tell you, this isn't your standard dictionary definition stuff. This material, it has a very specific, very opinionated voice.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't just define things neutrally. It really colors them with a particular philosophy about fitness, about intensity, what's considered worthwhile.
So our goal here is to unpack some of these key concepts, things like VO2 max, aerobic, anaerobic, lactate threshold, interval training, even heart rate monitors.
But strictly through the lens of this source,
Right.
what does this glossary really emphasize? What does it maybe find, controversial even in how we talk about fitness?
Yeah, let's dig in. So kicking off with one that often comes up as a benchmark, VO2 max. How does this particular source frame it?
Well, it gives the standard definition, the maximum oxygen you can use continuously, normalized by body mass. But then right away, it adds its own spin. It acknowledges it's a standard for aerobic capacity, sure, but it almost seems, dismissive of how significant it is for endurance athletes.
Dismissive how?
It sort of suggests their advantage might just be down to having lower body mass. It doesn't seem overly impressed by a high VO2 max number itself.
And there's that pointed analogy it uses too, right? Something about lifting weights.
Yeah, exactly. It compares normalizing VO2 max by body weight to normalizing lifts, saying it makes little guys stronger than big guys.
Okay.
So the implication seems to be that maybe VO2 max, when you divide by body mass, doesn't really show the full picture of, absolute power or capability. Maybe it even downplays what larger athletes can do.
Right. So it's suggesting VO2 max isn't the be-all and end-all metric for overall fitness from their perspective.
That seems to be the angle, yeah. It's definitely framing it differently than just a straight physiological definition.
Okay. Moving on to the classic energy systems then. Aerobic versus anaerobic. How does this glossary describe those?
Aerobic gets described pretty bluntly. It's called low-powered, low-intensity, long duration, more than several minutes. And then it adds, this is the easy stuff.
Easy stuff. Wow.
And it even states that people who focus only on aerobic stuff tend to crumble when they face, quote, real efforts.
Okay. Easy stuff and crumble. That's pretty strong language. Definitely shows a bias. What about anaerobic then?
Anaerobic, on the other hand, is defined as higher powered, higher intensity, shorter duration efforts, those less than several minutes. And here's where the commentary really kicks in. Anaerobic is Greek for worthwhile.
Worthwhile. Okay.
It even brings up a question attributed to Pookie about why there are so many recreational triathletes compared to, say, 800-meter runners. It seems to be reinforcing this idea that the anaerobic high-intensity work is more valuable.
That phrase worthwhile really tells you a lot about the source's preference for intensity, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's a core part of their philosophy.
So what about the point where you switch between these? The lactate threshold.
So the glossary defines the lactate threshold pretty standardly. It's the point where, as work intensity increases, lactic acid builds up faster than your body can clear it out. And it correctly notes this is also called the anaerobic threshold, marking that shift towards mostly anaerobic work.
But I'm guessing the commentary isn't quite so standard.
Not at all. In its very distinctive style, the source calls the lactate threshold the pussy rest stop.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. That phrase doesn't just define it, it slaps a pretty harsh value judgment on it. It strongly suggests that hitting this threshold isn't a place to ease off, but maybe a point you need to push right past if you want those worthwhile efforts.
That language is definitely provocative, reinforces that whole high-intensity focus. Let's talk training methods. Interval training.
Right. The source defines interval training simply as alternating high-intensity work periods with rest periods. Pretty straightforward. But the key insight or claim it offers is why it's important. It states this is exactly how anaerobic athletes develop tremendous levels of aerobic fitness.
Huh. That's a really interesting take from this source. It's positioning interval training, high-intensity bursts, as the main way to build endurance.
That's what it seems to argue. Traditionally, you think of long, slow distance for endurance, right? But this perspective says, no, pushing intensity through intervals is the primary driver for all fitness, including your aerobic capacity.
So you build endurance through the hard stuff, not just separate from it.
Exactly. It argues you get aerobically fit by doing anaerobic work in intervals. It even wonders who invented intervals and suggests, how else could you effectively do high-intensity work? It frames intervals as almost essential.
which, yeah, ties right back to their favoring of those anaerobic worthwhile efforts. Okay, last one. Heart rate monitors. Lots of people use them. This source, not a fan.
Not a fan is putting it mildly. Zero patients might be more accurate.
Yeah.
The source's view is super clear. Forget heart rate. It's all about the performance, the monitor itself, dismissed as a fun toy.
Just a toy.
Yeah. It even gives this sarcastic recipe for getting a high heart rate, reading something like mixed dehydration, beer, a steep hill, a bike, and a hot day.
Right. So not seen as a useful training tool at all, just a gadget producing meaningless numbers, according to this perspective.
Precisely. The focus is 100% on the output, the work you actually do, how much weight you lift, how fast you run, the distance, tangible performance, heart rate. That's just some internal thing happening, not the main game.
It really is a performance-first, intensity-driven viewpoint woven through every single definition, isn't it?
It really is. It's less a glossary and more like a manifesto for a specific way of training.
So wrapping this up, what does exploring these terms through this very particular, very opinionated source mean for you, the listener?
Well, I think it gives you a really clear example of how one specific fitness philosophy defines and prioritizes things like intensity and performance. It definitely forces you to consider different angles on these basic concepts.
Yeah, it challenges assumptions.
And it leaves you with some provocative questions, right? If this source claims interval training is the key to aerobic fitness for anaerobic athletes, does that make you rethink how you approach building endurance?
Or, if heart rate monitors are just toys and performance is everything, what metrics does this philosophy imply you should be laser focused on in your own training?
Exactly. Definitely some food for thought there as you figure out your own path in fitness.